Hello and welcome back to Fork in Politics. I'm Kalvin Chapman. Today we're going to look at what the hell happened in Stoke. So as you may recall from one of my earlier videos, I was delighted that Paul Nuttall was standing as the UKIP candidate in the by-election in Stoke Central. As most of you may know, it was a complete dog's dinner by the end of it, and we were fairly humiliated as a consequence. So let's dissect a bit of it. There's a by-election coming up in Manchester Gorton shortly. There's likely to be a by-election in Leigh when the Greater Manchester Mayor is elected. I'm not talking out of place here, but pretty much everybody is expecting Labour, Andy Burnham, to be elected because it's Greater Manchester and Labour will win regardless of who the candidate is, regardless of the promises that he keeps making that he can't keep. So there is likely to be an election in Leigh, and the one in Leigh we are quietly confident about. So I think it is important that we look at what happened in Stoke. We also need to look at the broader issues of what's wrong with UKIP and can it be fixed. I'm doing another video on UKIP, the party, very shortly. But for this one, I'm just going to look at what happened with Paul and the election in Stoke. One of the other things that occurred during the election was the Channel 4 reporter Michael Crick got hold of a copy of the nomination form, and there's nothing wrong with him doing that. And he looked at the address, so as any good reporter would, he went toddling off down the street to find the house, looked through the letterbox and the house looked empty, rang the estate agent because there was an estate agent's board outside, and the estate agent said the house was up for rent, and he basically went all over Twitter saying that Paul had committed electoral fraud. So the police are looking into that at the moment. I genuinely don't expect it to go anywhere. The police have far more important things to do. Paul, from what I'm led to believe, Paul was always intending to move into that house. He just hadn't at that point. So he very quickly got people to come around and photograph him and his underwear in the bedroom to prove that he lived there. So I do know that he and a large number of UKIP people moved into the house. They eventually had to move out because the crazy left people started trying to break into the house in the early hours of the morning, and it got a bit weird. So Paul ended up moving out. According to the Daily Mirror, Paul was, according to the Labour's own polling, Paul was on course to win. And that made everybody rather happy. We then found out from the Telegraph that Labour were keeping Corbyn away because he was toxic to people on the doorstep. Things were looking good. Paul looked like he had a good chance of winning, despite the weird clothing that he was wearing. So we were all positive, we were all getting very excited, and I saw on Twitter lots of people saying, lots of Conservatives saying the Conservatives definitely can't win, so they're going to hold their nose and vote UKIP. And then, as you saw from Fork in Politics YouTube channel, there was lots and lots of highly embarrassing tweets from the Labour candidate. So we really, really were positive. And then Paul went and did an interview, a radio interview, and he sat down. And possibly the worst thing that could have been said to him was said. I went to your website and typed in the word Hillsborough. And from that moment on, UKIP could not win the by-election. We lost. We got 25% of the vote, which was up on the 2015 election. But we didn't do too well. So the interview was with David Eason of Liverpool Radio, and he went to Paul's website, which had been in use since Paul became an MEP, And he typed in the word Hillsborough, and amongst the things that came up were a 2011 or 2012 press release. And in both of those press releases, it was said that Paul lost a close personal friend, and Paul didn't lose a close personal friend at the Hillsborough disaster. Shortly before that interview, The Guardian had run an article in which it claims to have had a school friend and a teacher that taught Paul, and they said that they didn't believe that Paul had even been at the Hillsborough Stadium on the day of the disaster. I think the Guardian article was complete bullshit. I think it was bollocks. It wouldn't make any sense for anyone to lie about being at the Hillsborough disaster, because it would be fairly easy to prove that they weren't. But, it looked all very shady, and this press release, because Paul immediately said, but I didn't lose a close personal friend, I lost somebody that I knew, but not a close personal friend. And I believed him. I believed that he wasn't aware that that was on his website. Whether he knew about it in 2011 and 12, I genuinely don't know. The truth of the matter became completely and utterly irrelevant, because we'd had Paul, the professional footballer, when he was never a professional footballer, Paul, the PhD graduate, when he wasn't a PhD graduate, and now Paul, the person that lost a close personal friend. It makes absolutely no difference why those things were said or why those two press releases were on his website. The fact was they were, and the issues about football and his PhD, etc., they'd been said historically as well, and consequently to the Conservative voters that were in Stoke Central, Paul was never going to get their vote, not after that. And the Labour people that really couldn't vote for Gareth Snell, they were never going to vote for Paul. If you put the two together and you're a Labour voter and you're wavering, you're going to go with the really awful Gareth Snell rather than the really awful Paul Nuttall. So it looked pretty bad. So one of the things that I got told that makes this rather difficult is that in 2015 and again in December 2016, it was known that there were questions around Hillsborough, and any half-decent campaign manager knowing that would, in my view, have wanted to see what was being said about Hillsborough and about Paul. And the first thing I would have done if I'd been the campaign manager is to put the word Hillsborough into the website and see what popped up. I mean, it was the first thing that the journalist, the Radio City journalist did. So I'm really struggling to understand if there were questions surrounding Hillsborough in the 2015 general election, and it was brought up again in December 2016. Why on earth did nobody think to look what was on his website about Hillsborough? It was bizarre. The other, and I think more odd thing that came up was the claim on the website that Paul had been invited to join the board of a charity, and the charity was categorical that they had never invited Paul to join their board of directors. They invited Paul to come and have a look round the charity, and apparently they did that to quite a large number of MEPs and MPs and various other politicians. So why was there a press release on his website saying he'd been invited to join the board of directors? I don't think at any point personally that Paul lied. I don't think he purposefully ever put anything out that he knew to be untrue. But on each occasion, he blamed a press officer. And the two things just ended up coalescing to make Stoke an unwinnable seat, because the truth of whether he was a professional footballer, PhD student, on the board of directors of a charity, and having lost a close personal friend, the truth of it became irrelevant. The issue for the voter was, why does he keep blaming someone else? Why has he never at any point just stopped blaming people and gone, it's my fault and I can't give you an explanation as to why it was on my website? That's what I'd have done. I'd have said, I don't know why it's on my website, it's my fault and I apologise wholeheartedly. Instead, he blamed a press officer who tendered a resignation, which was rejected immediately. It just gave the impression, and it stank really badly. And you've got to look at it from the point of view of the people that we were aiming to get to vote for us. We needed the Conservative vote to vote UKIP so that we had a chance of winning. We needed the disaffected Labour people that don't like Jeremy Corbyn to say, for once in my life, I'm not going to vote Labour, I'm going to vote UKIP. We needed that. We needed these people to vote for us. And this almost non-stop trail of bullshit that just kept coming out, it killed off any chances we had. I think as well as looking at what we did wrong, and I personally blame the campaign manager, I think she did an awful job. She basically spent the entire campaign responding to Labour. It was, Paul Nuttall wants to privatise the NHS, so all we did was talk about the NHS, and UKIP wants to do this or do that, and all we did, this is how it came across to me, to many other UKIP people, and I know for a fact it's how it came across to the Conservative voters, was we were only answering what Labour threw at us. We were only ever doing press conferences where we were answering what Labour had said about us, and instead of grabbing it by the scruff of the neck saying, that's all bullshit, this is what our policies are and this is what we want to talk about, that's what we should have been doing. We should have been showing that we're the radical party, that we are the party that is not the same old. We are the party that has real policies. We've just finished Brexit and all we talked about was Brexit and the NHS. And fine, we need to talk about Brexit. We need to talk about what's happening next with Brexit. And yes, Paul needed to answer the NHS because it was a really important thing. But that was it. It just needed bringing up once. All of the leaflets were about the NHS. All the leaflets were about Brexit. All of the conversations with journalists was about Brexit and the NHS. Nothing else. We were a single policy party again. And the Conservative voters needed to see that we had something going for us over and above our desire to leave the EU. We've won that vote. We've won that argument. And the campaign manager did not run a campaign for Paul that highlighted what UKIP is and what UKIP stands for and what UKIP can do for you, the Conservative voter, and you, the Labour voter. This is what we can do for you. None of that was there. It was, Labour have said this, so we're going to respond to it. When the journalists are saying, you want to privatise the NHS, Labour has said, instead of going, well, we know that's rubbish, I've already said that, this is what our policies are. Instead, it was answer their questions and don't bring anything else up. So I think Paul has to look at why he was doing interviews like that, instead of just seizing the day, seizing the moment and telling people what we want them to hear. We in the party, we already know what UKIP stands for. We know what's in the manifesto. We know what UKIP is at its core. And all we came across as was liars and people that have got no policies and can only answer what Labour's throwing at us. In addition to that, Labour put up the worst candidate. I mean, I can't fathom who in their right mind thought it was sensible putting Gareth Schneller. He was awful. He came across as bland. He came across as a bit thick at times. What he'd written on Twitter was just astonishing. The guy was a shambles. He hates his own party. He hates the party leader. He hated most of the senior politicians in Labour. The guy was toxic. He was vile. And instead of seizing it and running with it, we dropped the ball and we just pandered to what Labour wanted us to say. Labour just couldn't believe the luck. We ran an awful campaign. We could absolutely have wiped the floor, and the line stuff was one thing, but the failure to put forward what our policies are just was the final nail that went into that coffin. And I expected we would, after all of that awful stuff came out, I thought we would end up with about 30%, because surely we're about to start telling people in Stoke what it is we can do for Stoke, and we didn't. We just pandered to what Labour wanted us to say. We just responded to the journalists' question instead, taking it on to the questions we wanted to answer. That's what we should have done, and we didn't, and we lost. As well as having an awful candidate, the campaign that Labour ran should have killed them off. Had that been the Copeland, if that had been the campaign in Copeland and Stoke hadn't been in play, the dirtiness by which Labour were playing absolutely would have killed their campaign off, and we'd have won. We'd have won hands down. They were sending somebody that was a member of the Labour Party was sending text messages out to Muslims saying, if you vote UKIP, you're going to hell. I mean, it was astonishing. The Liberal Democrats reported that to the police. UKIP Greater Manchester have reported it to the police, and we're pursuing that. It was awful. And the things they were saying, they were outright lying. And we should have seized on that, and we should have made capital out of it. Certainly, on the day of the vote on the 23rd of February, people just didn't go out and vote, because the Labour people absolutely didn't want to vote for that dribbling imbecile Gareth Snell, and didn't want to vote for a party that just outright lied, didn't want to vote for a party that would, what appeared to be, and I don't know whether it's true, but it appeared that they were condoning somebody sending out text messages to Muslims saying they were going to hell. So nobody wanted to go out and vote for Labour, so they didn't. But unfortunately, we'd run such a bad campaign that they didn't want to go out and vote for us either. You know, I was really hoping that the Green candidate would make capital out of it and would end up with a really good vote. And it was such a bad turnout that even the Green candidate didn't do well. And he, amongst anybody, absolutely should have done. And let's not forget, you know, this is a point I keep forgetting, but at the beginning of the campaign, the Conservatives let it be known through back channels that they weren't going to put anything into Stoke. They were going to leave it to Labour. You know, they came just behind Labour in the 2015 election. They came third, we came second. And they had a financial decision to make. Do they go for Copeland, do they go for Stoke, or do they go for both? And they made it clear at the beginning, without directly saying it to the press, that they weren't putting anything into Stoke. They were going to go all out in Copeland, which they did, and they weren't there. And it was a historic win, and it was a fantastic win for them in Copeland. But we absolutely should have made huge capital out of it. as I said earlier on, on Twitter, I saw a lot of Conservative voters that were saying, we aren't going to win. Absolutely, we want Labour to be humiliated. We're all going to vote UKIP. Now, I don't think it would have been wholesale, and if all of the bad things hadn't have happened, we'd have ended up with 75% of the Tory vote. I don't think that in the least. But I do think we would have got a substantially greater vote than we did. And as it turned out, all of the UKIP diehards came out and voted, so we ended up with at least what we got in 2015. And a few others were so disgusted with Labour that they voted for us, so we ended up with a few more. But it was atrocious. I mean, it really, really was atrocious. I support Paul. I voted for Paul in the leadership. I've been a fan of Paul's for a long time. I was at the Northwest Conference when, in the first leadership election, he said that he wasn't going to stand, and the gasps in the room that Paul wasn't going to stand, because people really, really wanted Paul to stand. And then we had the unfortunate incidents that we had, and eventually Diane was elected, and Diane stood down 18 days later, and I understand why she did that. So there was another election, and Paul got a huge mandate, massive mandate. He got 60% of the vote, and I know he's got detractors in the party. There are people that think because Paul wouldn't immediately boot out Carswell and wouldn't immediately boot out Susan Evans, there are a certain faction that absolutely just cannot stand Paul because of that. And I fully agreed with and backed the message Paul had when he got elected. Slate clean for everybody. We're going to start again. Let's bring everybody together and let's go forward as a united party. And if you step foot out of line, then you will be gone. And I think that was the best thing for him to do for the party. It's going to take him ages to fix some of the things that are wrong with the party. We went from 2% of the vote in before 2010 to winning the European elections in 2014 to 14% of the vote, 4 million voters in 2015. So we've grown really quickly, but the party hasn't had the financial backing to do that. And we've got people that want us to stay where we were back in the day, and we've got people that want us to go forward. And there's warring parties as a consequence of that. But there are, you look at Labour pre-Corbyn, there was always, factions. There were, during the Blair years, there was the Brown cabal and there was the Blair cabal, and the same with the Conservatives. I'm sure in the Lib Dems, there's probably the same. I know nothing about their politics, but they're a large party, so I would imagine they have the same as well. So I fully back Paul. I think we do have a problem in that, as a consequence of what happened in Stoke, Paul will never be elected as an MP. That now is not a possibility. In 2019, we're going to lose all of our MEPs. Our only MP resigned from the party yesterday, as at the filming of this. So I think there is some significant issues coming up for Paul, because I think he will make a great leader and I think he will mould UKIP really well. But I think if we get people elected in 2020, it would be weird having a leader that is not an MP if we've got MPs in the party, because he'll no longer be an MEP at that point. He'll have to go off and get a job, as will all the other MEPs. It's going to be, 2020 will be strange, because we'll have gone from having actual political power to none. And 2020 will be the time where we will desperately need to get MPs. So I think there's questions to be had in 2-3 years' time. But for right now, we need Paul exactly where he is. We need the party to unite. We need people to stop being negative, and we need people to look at what went wrong with Stoke and look at how we can better that. We in Manchester, we've elected our candidate for Gorton. We know that we're probably never going to win Gorton unless something weird happens. But we're going to use it to show the people of Manchester what UKIP Manchester's about. We're going to use what happened in Stoke to ensure that when we're talking to the press, we're not following the lead of what the Lib Dems or what Labour want us to say. We're going to say what our central message is, and we don't care what theirs is. We're going to show that Labour is not a very nice party, but the makeup of Manchester Gorton means that Labour will almost certainly win. I personally am hoping that the Green Party will shock everybody and do some amazing stuff and get some really good votes in there. I was a bit disappointed with the Lib Dem candidate. They absolutely would have done an amazing job if they'd have used the same candidate from 2010. He put his name forward, and for some reason he was not selected, and as a consequence I don't think the Lib Dems are going to do that good. I think they'll do better than they did in 2015, but I don't think they'll do as well as they did in 2010. I think the Greens will come second. I think they'll do very well. I think George Galloway will embarrass himself enormously, and I think UKIP with our candidate will do quite well. So that's the end of that. Thanks very much. Bye bye.